Okay, so today, as you mentioned, be sure you're registered there. Today I'm going to talk about 4K video and a bit about adoption, why we think it's going to move at the rate that it's moving into the market, and what we see as some of the constraints really and challenges that are out there. Because everyone wants it, right? Everyone wants to use, Shark Week on full 4K would be much better. All of the games and shows. Have you guys seen any of the 4K out here? It's much better, right? Live sports are still a question mark in terms of when that comes, but there's actually a decent amount of research around what it's going to take, right, to double the resolution from 1080p to 4K, and how you deliver it. How many of you were in the talk yesterday by Dan Rayburn on IP trends, where he touched a bit on 4K, right? And he talked about how it wasn't going to happen anytime soon, partly because of concerns around delivering a 15 megabit stream, right? Not that it's not possible, but more about who's going to pay for it, right? What happens when you, as a content provider, end up now having to pay 5x to your CDN provider or for transmission? That really fundamentally got to the heart of why many of the providers, content providers, and device guys out there aren't moving 4K along more quickly. Because the current stream, depending upon the device, it might be anywhere from a couple of megs to 700 kilobits. It's pretty doable across most devices, but at home and on mobile, actually achieving a consistent 15 meg stream with no drops and people not disconnecting or abandoning is a challenge right now. And one of those is cost. This is an eye chart that just shows that to really get the benefit out of 4K, you are going to need much bigger screens, TV screens. So luckily they're pretty cost effective, but still the amount of content that's out there and amount of providers that are really pushing it is still pretty light today. Intelsat did an interesting study on when 4K was going to hit the mainstream, and they polled a number of people within the industry, and about 63% of them felt like it was still about 7 years off, which is pretty far to hit the mainstream, right? Why? A big part of the concerns, actually, you would think, well, content availability, what about filming, right? What about all of those things more at the bottom of the list would be problems. The biggest concerns actually have to do with ROI and the cost of transmission. That's really insightful, right? We have the technology there. The cameras are certainly there. There's plenty of ability to actually store this content out there. The problem is, who is going to actually pay for delivering a 15 meg stream? And how do you make that work, right? So ROI is at the top of the list for the big content owners, and how they're going to make money, and how those along the workflow and along the ecosystem are going to make money at it. Now, when I'm more of a networking guy. I come more from the telecommunications and delivery side of this business. And I think one thing that I find interesting right now is that the internet has actually reached a point where it can't scale to support the media growth, right? When you think about how the whole internet was built and the networks that are out there today, they were all driven mostly by network connectivity sort of drivers. The landing stations that we have, of which there are kind of 4 major areas in the US, all of the peering exchanges, they tend to reside in very specific areas What we're seeing today is a very different world where the big content providers online are really the ones in the driver's seat and are driving where the telecommunications industry is going to go. That's where the bulk of the traffic is. And there's a reason that Facebook and Google and Apple and Microsoft are all building their own networks with dark fiber, and it's because the telecommunications industry actually doesn't scale to provide a service to them that actually makes sense economically. It's really interesting. So I think that there are three big reasons that I see that are problems for us right now in terms of achieving higher and higher rates out to the end users. One are long-haul networks, frankly. I think the edge will be solved here pretty quickly. Public peering is still a big issue. When you have peering infrastructure in place that's built for 1 gig public peering between parties, it's sort of, what's the point of that? Maybe that was good in a normal .com web-based e-commerce sort of world, but does nothing for video. And then also content distribution. I would submit that the majority of CDNs that were here yesterday and the ones that are here today, the topologies that they have in place today won't scale, and they'll have to re-architect those. We're seeing most of them go through those changes now. Now, why is it? So let's dive into the specifics of long haul. And those of you that manage P&L will get this pretty quickly. Because it's pretty simple, right? You have a data center. Maybe you're in Atlanta at one of the big peering points, and you're delivering your content through a CDN that's connected to multiple carriers and ISPs. Those guys are connected to either paying transit or buying long haul to reach other metros, other MSAs. So in this case, for example, in the south and southeast part of the U.S. is a really interesting place because you have peering points in Atlanta and Washington, D.C., or Ashburn. You have Miami way down there, but actually to reach all of that area sort of east of Dallas, you don't have much else in the way of peering or major network interconnection points. So what you end up having to do to reach large MSAs, to reach other MSOs or cable providers in other regions, is you have to pay for backhaul, long haul, or you have to buy IP transit, right? Buying IP transit for 100 gig, Dan went over this yesterday, it's about 45 cents for 100 gig per meg. So that's about $45K for just buying transit. Buying long haul, you may be able to get it for about 15 to 20K per month. But the problem is transmission costs and going from 5 to 15 megs to get redundancy, you're talking about having to pretty significantly grow your deployment of the network. And this is really the crux of the problem. The other big trend, how many of you have heard of DOCSIS? Right? So DOCSIS is a technology for delivering data, internet, over cable, existing cable, hybrid cable fiber plant. And it's put in place by most of the big cable companies and MSOs. Competes with PON, which is used by AT&T and Verizon to deliver high-speed internet service. But DOCSIS 3.1 will deliver a notional download speed of up to 10 gigs to the home. And 1 gig upload. Now, the average, who knows what the average bandwidth is to the home today on NetStat or whatever? Any guesses? 12? That's what I would think. That's what I feel like. It's actually 30. Right. So DOCSIS 3.1 is going to represent probably close to 40x improvement on most bandwidth to the home. Now that, I would submit, is going to do a lot more damage than watching a 4K stream. Imagine the ability to get a gig to the home, it will get consumed. And you're seeing all sorts of things in the market. Google Fiber, there's a reason all of those, all the big content providers are building their own networks. An interesting report by Infonetics came out a few months ago, and they had polled the service provider industry, cable providers actually. And they said, when do you think you'll deliver a gig to the home? And they said, within 2 years, by 2017, having implemented DOCSIS 3.1 out to the edge, which is a simple modem change at home, right? Probably covered by your cable service, cable internet service, and a change at the head end. 40% of our users will have a gig to the home within 2 years by 2017. It's huge. It's huge. And to me, we've seen this actually happen with one of our customers, Bright House, which just actually upgraded 300 megs to the home in the Tampa area for all of their premium subscribers overnight. And it created, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it created a lot of challenges for the upstream video partners of theirs and streaming media partners of theirs. So all of that is changing. Here's the other thing. So long haul is not going to scale because it's not cost effective. Peering, what about peering? You know, all these content providers can just move all your stuff right into the major peering exchanges. There are about 8 major peering markets in the US, according to Bill Norton, who wrote the peering playbook. There are a handful of others and many small peering exchanges around the US, but there are about 8 major cities: Seattle, LA, San Jose, Chicago, New York, Ashburn, and Atlanta. Dallas and Miami fall somewhere in there, but they're not nearly as large as the others. Now here's the problem. That's perfectly fine for delivering content that is not terribly latency sensitive, content that's fairly lightweight. But when you're trying to deliver millions of streams of 15 meg video, that model just doesn't even close to work, right? Because, by the way, there's a whole bunch of other people who live in the US outside of those other cities. So I took a look at the MSAs. If you take a look at all the major metropolitan areas, this is looking at all of the counties within the United States and rates them based on the population. So the darkest blue is represents counties with a population of at least 2 million. And then it goes down to 1.5 and 1 million, et cetera. So when you overlay the topology of most of the CDNs, just in the US today, you see that they also position their POPs mostly within the areas of the US. Oh, it shifted over a little bit. But they're mostly positioned in those major peering markets. Why? Because it's cheaper to peer in some of those markets to reduce their bandwidth costs. That's part of their business model. The reality is that the rest of these markets are absolutely just as important, right? Why? Because even though they might not have been important yesterday, when you're delivering, let's say, just 10x the volume of traffic to each of these markets, then it makes even some of the smallest markets seem that much more important. So I'm going to talk briefly about it's actually several of our customers that have gone through this model, which is looking at how to overcome this problem of streaming into these other markets, and it's pretty simple. You know, you simply move, develop your own cache there, deploy a cache there locally, connect to the local cable providers, and you'll save some costs. But what they found was actually something I thought even more interesting, which was not only did they avoid millions of dollars of OpEx by not paying for more and more 100 gig backhaul circuits to support really Bright House upgrading to 300 megs and then a gig later this year. But the big problem, the big opportunity for them actually had to do with the nearly or the short ramp up to more customers, more subscribers, more bandwidth. it really was more like a quadrupling of bandwidth. And for that, for CDNs and for many of these guys, a lot of that equates almost directly to revenue, right? So to me, the exciting thing is, and one of the issues I take with what Dan went over yesterday is, for content owners that are trying to deliver and migrate from linear channel programming to OTT, it's not just about looking at the network as a cost to your business and how you overcome it. It's actually about looking at the model and thinking, okay, if we do this and if we adopt this, how do we re-architect and make sure that we can deliver much more efficiently to the edge and know that you can actually capture that cost back or capture additional revenue by selling higher CPMs across more bandwidth that you generate by moving content closer. It's the same model that any advertiser uses on the internet. Lower latency means more packets delivered, more ads served, et cetera. So all of this, to me, is really about looking at what I think is really going to happen with 4K. One is, I really don't think the internet is going to scale in what it is today. It really won't. In fact, I think the content providers are the ones calling the shots now. We've seen it with net neutrality. We've seen it in just the industry and what's moving the industry. And I do think content is just going to move closer to the edge. All of it will have to. It's not going to go to the extreme that Akamai had back when they started with 20,000 small pizza box servers everywhere, but they're going to be in every major MSA, and it's going to have to go that route. It's the only cost-effective way to do it. I think DOCSIS, even though no one should have to learn that crazy name, Data Over Cable Service Interface Specification, it's going to come here much faster than you think. And people at home are going to have hundreds of megs to the home, and they're just going to demand more. And it's going to put more and more pressure on everything, and the content providers that get ahead of the market today to deliver that consistent user experience in a world that's expecting 10x what they're getting today are the ones that are going to win. And I think peering will again also be re-architected. And with regard to 4K, I think frankly it's not really what will drive the market in the next several years. What's going to drive the market is if the top 3 or 4 cable providers actually roll out DOCSIS in a meaningful way to all their subscribers, then everyone's job here just got 10 times harder, because it's going to be the subscribers that are going to demand more content and better content. And I don't think that the industry actually, CDNs, as well as just the way we've designed for delivery, is going to scale as quickly as the edge will scale. So that's I'd love to take any questions, debate this around a little bit. Any thoughts from people? Yep. Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole peering market, peering at 100 gig, I think providers are going to have to step into that world and consider it, because we're going to step into sort of an order of magnitude growth. And while I agree that, you know, the average person isn't just going to start watching more and more streams, right? What I found intriguing was just the fact that they improved that latency, moved the content closer, and within a few months, traffic tripled. I'm not sure exactly why, but there's something about either more subscribers, the way people consume, how they consume, that doesn't have to be all from a single subscriber, right? But there's significant growth ahead just by improving the experience. Yep.
Can you talk about what Bright House's business motivations were to make that change? And also in the telcos and the MVPDs that you're talking to, who are going to deploy DOCSIS, what's their financial motivation for doing it, and how hard does it hit the customer?
Right. So I didn't put a slide on here, but most of them are doing it for differentiation, to offer higher levels of bandwidth, because while Bright House is sort of a major player down there, they're also competing either against AT&T or Verizon Fios that offer high-speed internet. And also it gives them a way to sort of compete with the overbuilders that are in those markets, the smaller cable providers that are very niche-oriented, possibly tied to a utility in the area. It gives them a way to sort of distance themselves from those overbuilders.
And the second question, as DOCSIS 3.1 is rolled out, how hard are the MVPDs going to hit their customers for the additional bandwidth?
Right. Well, so they have been just keeping the rates the same, and giving the customer the benefit of upgrading. I think most of these providers, as far as I can see, are still trying to figure out how to make more money on content, which is, I think, the right way to go. Make more money on different ways to consume content as opposed to just on the network. I mean, this is a pretty simple change. You know, it's swapping out your old end-of-life modem for another modem that you can either buy at Amazon for $100 or have your cable provider just come out and replace it for free. So it's a pretty trivial change at the home. All right, so that's all that I had. You know, 365 operates data centers all through the U.S. We focus on carriers and content providers and businesses that need to deliver content, but our whole model is around really delivering content and working with the different platforms and delivery companies within the ecosystem. So thank you very much.